The city pulsed below, a blur of movement and ambition beneath glass towers. On the top floor of one of the tallest buildings, Elijah Monroe sat behind a desk of polished walnut, the skyline framed behind him like a painting. His office was silent, precise, just like him. Everything was where it belonged. Every decision he made was efficient. Every minute accounted for. And yet none of it felt like living. At 43, Elijah was the kind of man others measured themselves against. A tech magnate with no partners, no children, no attachments. He'd built his empire from the ground up with nothing but grit and silence. That silence still surrounded him, even in success. He preferred it that way. No interruptions, no distractions, no messy emotions to weigh him down. Children to him were the messiest of all, loud, unpredictable, dependent. And love, a beautiful illusion that got in the way of logic. He told himself this often enough to believe it. Each morning began the same. Black coffee, unread newspapers, a cold glance through the window. His employees whispered about how nothing got past Elijah Monroe, that he was sharp, brilliant, and untouchable, but they never said he was kind. They never said he was happy. He had banished anything soft from his life the moment he tasted power, and softness never came knocking again. Until that day, it was raining, the kind of rain that blurred outlines and softened the city's edges. Elijah didn't notice it. He barely looked up from his screen as people buzzed in and out with updates and reports. That was until a security guard stepped in, out of breath and hesitant. "Sir," the man said, "there's a child here. She slipped past the lobby, says she wants to talk to the man in the big glass room." Elijah didn't look up. "Call social services." "She won't leave." "She will when you escort her out." "She's, already inside, sir." Elijah finally raised his eyes, and there she was, standing near the door, drenched from the rain, small hands clutching a plastic bag. Her shoes were too big, likely someone else's, and her coat had holes at the elbows. Her face was thin, pale, but her eyes, large and searching, met his without fear. She said nothing, just looked at him like she had been looking for him her whole life. He stared at her, confused and irritated by the sudden rupture in his routine. "Who are you?" "My name is Lila," she said quietly. "Mommy says you're the richest man in the world." Elijah blinked. The room was too quiet. And you might have food." The silence stretched. Elijah didn't know what to say. He had met heads of state, billionaires, and founders of empires. But he had never felt so utterly disarmed. He could have called someone, could have ordered her gone. But instead he stood slowly, as if waking from something. She looked so small in that room of marble and steel. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Elijah Monroe, the man who had everything, felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Discomfort. Not because she was poor, not because she was unexpected, but because she made him feel something he couldn't name. He reached for the phone, then paused. "Where's your mother?" "She's outside, sleeping." "In the rain?" She nodded. "She told me to find you." Elijah lowered the receiver without dialing. Outside, the rain fell harder. And for the first time in years, he didn't care about the next meeting on his calendar. Something had shifted, something quiet but undeniable. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just begun to change. The room, usually sharp with the scent of espresso and polished stone, now smelled faintly of rain and something softer. Wet wool, maybe, or the cold trace of a child's breath. Elijah stood still, staring at the girl as if she were a ghost that had wandered in from some forgotten part of his life. His employees lingered outside the glass wall, unsure whether to intervene, waiting for their boss to erupt or dismiss the intrusion with a cold wave of his hand. But Elijah said nothing. Leela stepped closer, the soles of her shoes making soft, squelching sounds against the sleek floor. One shoe was missing its sole, he noticed. Her socks were mismatched, thin, clinging to her toes like skin. Her coat barely reached her knees. She looked no older than 7, yet there was no fear in her, only a quiet, stubborn hope. "I'm not supposed to beg," she said, her voice small but clear. "Mommy says not to, but she's really sick today." Elijah felt a tightness in his chest that he didn't recognize. Not guilt, not yet. Just an interruption in his well-oiled rhythm. He gestured to the leather chair in front of his desk. "Sit." She obeyed, carefully placing her plastic bag on her lap. It crinkled faintly. Inside, he saw a tattered notebook, a broken pen, and a wrinkled granola bar. That was all she had. "Who told you to come here?" he asked. She looked up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. "No one. Mommy talks about you sometimes. She said if we got really stuck, maybe you'd help." "Why me?" "I think because you used to be like us." The words landed like a quiet bomb. Elijah sat back, stunned. No one knew about his childhood. Not his board of directors, not the press, not even his assistant of 7 years. He had buried it so deep it barely existed, or so he thought. But this girl, this soaked, stubborn little girl, was digging it up without even trying. He looked at her again, slower this time. She wasn't asking for much. Just food, maybe a blanket, not even money. And somehow that made it worse, that she came with so little expectation. He reached for the intercom. "Get something from the cafeteria, a meal, hot, for a child." Lila's eyes lit up, but she didn't smile. Instead, she reached into her plastic bag and handed him a crumpled napkin. "You can write it down here in case you forget." He took it without thinking. The napkin had faint doodles on it. Flowers, stars, a crooked house. She had drawn herself inside it, alone. He cleared his throat. "You said your mother is sick?" "She sleeps a lot now. Sometimes she forgets to wake up." Her voice wavered. "I tried to find medicine, but the man at the pharmacy said it costs $100. Elijah didn't answer. A part of him recoiled, tried to shut down the discomfort rising inside him. Another part, the one he thought had long gone quiet, leaned forward. He stood and reached for his coat. "Take me to her." Lila blinked. "Now?" "Yes, now." She nodded slowly and rose, clutching her bag. As they stepped toward the elevator, Elijah's assistant called after him. "Sir, your meeting with the Tokyo investors?" "Cancel it," he said without looking back. In the elevator, Lila stood beside him silently, dripping on the marble floor. She smelled of rain and cold. "You didn't ask my name," he said after a long pause. She turned to him. "I didn't need to." The elevator dinged. Elijah followed her out into the storm, and with each step into the unfamiliar street, the past he'd buried began to rise. Uninvited, undeniable. The rain came down harder as they stepped outside, soaking through Elijah's designer coat within minutes. Lila walked ahead, her feet splashing in shallow puddles, never once complaining about the cold or the weight of her soaked clothes. She didn't turn around to check if he was still behind her. Somehow she already trusted that he was. Elijah followed, wordless and uncomfortable. He was used to armored cars and private elevators, not navigating back alleys behind grocery stores. The city looked different from this angle. Closer, less polished. The smell of oil, garbage, and wet cardboard filled his lungs. He wondered how long it had been since he'd walked a street without a destination tied to a profit. "Down here," Lila called, pointing to a narrow passage behind a shuttered laundromat. He hesitated. The concrete was slick, the air cold. This was not his world, but something in her voice, calm, certain, pushed him forward. Under a canopy of rusted pipes and sagging plastic tarps, Elijah saw her. Lila's mother, She was curled up on a pile of flattened boxes, her body wrapped in what looked like 3 layers of donated clothing. Her skin was pale, lips tinged with blue, dark hair tangled around her face. She didn't move when Lila approached. Didn't wake. "Mommy?" Lila whispered, kneeling beside her. "I brought someone." Rachel stirred slightly, her brow tightening. She didn't open her eyes. Lila pulled a ragged blanket higher over her chest and looked up at Elijah. "She was warm this morning," she said softly, "but now she's cold again." Elijah knelt without thinking, placing 2 fingers against her neck. The pulse was there, but faint, unsteady, her breathing shallow. She needed help, real help. Not food, not a blanket. A hospital. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No." Lila clutched his arm. "Please. If they see us here, they'll take me away." Elijah hesitated. "You're a child. You need someone to care for you." "I have someone." Her grip tightened. "I have her." His throat tightened. He had never been someone children clung to. Never had someone trust him just for being present. "She needs a hospital," he said gently. "And you? I can go with her, right?" Her voice was smaller now. "You'll come too?" He looked down at her, this fragile, unbending child who had invaded his office and shattered the armor he wore so effortlessly. In her, he saw something he didn't know he missed. Bravery in the face of hopelessness. Love with no conditions. "Yes," he said finally, "I'll come too." When the paramedics arrived, Elijah stood by, shielding Lila from their questions as they loaded her mother into the ambulance. She reached for her mother's hand the entire time, never letting go. "She's my whole world," Lila whispered. And though he didn't say it out loud, Elijah understood. Because for the first time in a long, long while, something inside him felt less empty, less cold. The ambulance pulled away. He looked down at Lila, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her small face turned up toward his. "Where will we go now?" she asked. He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he offered her his hand, and she took it. Elijah had never brought a child into his home before. Not once. Not even for a fleeting visit. But that night, as the city lights flickered beneath the windows of his penthouse and rain streaked down the glass, Lila stood barefoot on his marble floor, dripping quietly into the silence. She didn't ask for toys or snacks. She didn't even ask about her mother, who was now lying unconscious in a hospital bed. She simply looked around with wide eyes as if trying to decide whether this place was real or just a very clean version of the dream she sometimes had when she was warm enough to sleep. Elijah handed her a towel. "You can use the guest room down the hall." She nodded politely. "Thank you, mister." "Elijah," he corrected, surprised by how foreign it felt to offer his name like that. She paused. "Okay, thank you, Elijah." He stood awkwardly as she disappeared into the guest room, closing the door gently behind her. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It gnawed at him, sharp and unfamiliar. There were toys being delivered, a change of clothes on the way, and a private nurse keeping him updated on Rachel's condition. He had done everything right, everything he was supposed to do, so why couldn't he breathe? He poured himself a drink and sank into the leather couch, trying to lose himself in the glow of the fireplace. But the flames only reminded him of another night, a lifetime ago. A boy huddled beneath a blanket in a state-run shelter, the smell of mildew, the coughs of other forgotten children, and a hollow ache in his stomach that no one ever seemed to notice. That boy had learned quickly. Never ask for more, and never trust anyone who offers something without taking something in return. That boy had become a man who built his own kingdom, without family, without risk, without softness. Because softness broke things, and broken things were for the weak. He hadn't thought about that boy in years, hadn't needed to. But now Lila's voice echoed in his ears. Mommy said you used to be like us. He set the glass down, untouched. She was right. He had been like her. Only no one had shown up for him when he was 7 years old, soaked to the bone and whispering hope into the silence. He had survived anyway, clawed his way out. But at what cost? A quiet knock startled him. Lila stood in the hallway, wearing one of his old t-shirts that hung to her knees. Her hair was damp from a shower. She held the crumpled napkin she had given him earlier. "Can I sleep with this?" she asked. He nodded, his throat tight. She turned to go, then stopped. "You were really poor once, weren't you?" He didn't answer. "I think that's why you feel sad now," she said gently. "Even though you're rich." Elijah stared at her, words caught behind his lips. She offered a small smile. "But it's okay. Sometimes I feel sad too. It just means your heart remembers." Then she disappeared down the hall, and Elijah, alone again, didn't feel like the man who had everything. He felt like someone who had spent a lifetime running from the very thing he needed most, the chance to be known. The next morning, Elijah rose before the sun, though he hadn't truly slept. His body had rested, but his mind hadn't stopped turning. Lila's words lingered like the aftertaste of something sweet and sorrowful. "Sometimes I feel sad, too. It just means your heart remembers." He wasn't ready for how deeply that would stay with him. She was already awake when he stepped into the kitchen, her feet dangling off one of the bar stools, a glass of orange juice cupped in her small hands. She gave him a little nod, not like a child needing approval, but like someone who had seen far too much to pretend anymore. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," she said. "It's quiet here. That's nice." He nodded and poured himself coffee. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, just unusual for Elijah. No meetings, no ringing phones, no spreadsheets demanding his attention. Just this child, sitting across from him in one of his own shirts, drinking juice like she belonged here. A notification buzzed on his phone. Rachel was stable, still unconscious but under care. The doctors were running more tests. "She'll be okay," Elijah said, reading the message aloud. "She just needs rest." Lila looked down. "I think she's been tired for a really long time." He didn't know what to say to that. Instead, he asked the question that had been tugging at him since the night before. "Where have you two been staying?" "All over," Lila said. "We used to live in a place with blue walls. But then Mommy couldn't pay, so we moved. Sometimes shelters, sometimes friends. Lately, just outside." Elijah felt his jaw tighten. He remembered what it meant to be constantly moving, to carry your life in a bag, to never be able to unpack. She looked up. "Want to see where we sleep sometimes?" It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't even a request. It was just a simple, honest invitation. One that no part of his life had prepared him to accept. And yet something deep within him already had. He didn't wear the suit that day. He put on jeans and a coat he hadn't touched in years. And as they walked through the morning streets, Elijah saw his city in a way he hadn't seen since his youth. The skyscrapers looked taller from the ground. The air carried more noise, more truth. They passed shuttered stores, people wrapped in blankets, broken bikes chained to rusted fences. Lila waved to a few faces that nodded back. An old woman with a shopping cart, a teenager strumming a cracked guitar. "They're nice," she said. "They just don't have stuff." They arrived behind the laundromat, the same place he had followed her to just a day before. A pile of cardboard, some plastic crates, a few bottles of water. She pointed to it without ceremony. "This is home. Was home." Elijah stared at the spot, trying to imagine what it would be like to tuck in your child beside trash bins and rats, knowing tomorrow might not come with food. His chest ached, and he didn't fight it. Not this time. "Sometimes," how she added, "I pretend this is a camping trip, like on TV. Makes it feel less scary." He crouched beside her, not caring that his knees touched the wet ground. You shouldn't have to pretend. You should have a real bed, a real room. She looked at him carefully. But then I wouldn't have met you. The simplicity of that answer unraveled him. A few minutes passed in silence. Then he stood, brushing the dirt from his hands. We'll clean this up. You won't need it anymore. You sure? She asked. He nodded. Yes, I'm sure. And as they walked back toward the heart of the city, Elijah realized something had shifted again. He wasn't just seeing the world differently, he was beginning to see himself differently too. Not as the man who had escaped the past, but as someone who might finally have the courage to face it. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of machines and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Rachel lay motionless, her face pale against the stark white pillow. An IV dripped rhythmically beside her. Her breathing had evened out, but she remained unconscious, trapped in some deep, silent space where worry couldn't reach her, but neither could her daughter. Elijah stood at the foot of the bed, unsure of what to do with his hands. He had faced boardrooms of stone-faced men, negotiated billion-dollar deals, held the silence of entire rooms in his grip. But nothing about this moment felt like something he could control. Lila sat in the chair beside her mother's bed, holding Rachel's limp fingers in both of hers. She was whispering softly, as if trying to coax her mother back with stories only the two of them understood. It was not a scene Elijah had ever imagined being a part of, and yet he didn't want to leave. A nurse entered, clipboard in hand. "You're Mr. Monroe?" He nodded. "She's stable, dehydrated, severely malnourished, but no permanent damage, just exhaustion and untreated respiratory issues. If she'd stayed outside another day or two..." The nurse stopped herself. "Well, you brought her in just in time." Elijah nodded again, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't deserve praise. He had only done what any human being should have done, and yet a part of him knew he wouldn't have done it a week ago. "Is she family?" the nurse asked gently. Elijah hesitated. "No, I mean, I'm not sure what we are." The nurse offered a kind smile. "You're here. That counts for something." After she left, Elijah stepped closer to the bed. Rachel's face was familiar in a distant, aching way. Not because he'd seen her before, but because there was something about her that reminded him of people he had once known. Women with weary eyes and kind hands. Women who never asked for help, even when they needed it most. Later that evening, she stirred. It was subtle, just a twitch in her fingers, a slow flutter of her eyelids. But it made Lila leap to her feet. "Mommy?" Rachel turned her head slightly, blinking against the light. Her voice was dry, cracked. "Lila." "I'm here," the girl whispered, clinging to her mother's hand. "I found him. The man in the glass office." Rachel's eyes slowly shifted to Elijah. Her brows furrowed. Confusion, recognition. Then something else. Embarrassment. "You're Monroe," she murmured. "I didn't mean for her to bother you. She was just scared." "She didn't bother me," Elijah said quietly. "She helped me." Rachel tried to sit up, but the effort was too much. Elijah instinctively reached to steady her, and she let him. For a moment their eyes met, his full of something uncertain but sincere, hers guarded and worn thin. "I remember you," she said slowly. "You came into the ER once, years ago, cutting your hand, refused stitches. You were angry, not at the cut, at the world." He blinked. He remembered the incident. Hadn't thought of it in years. "You were the nurse." "I was the one who convinced you not to walk out bleeding," she said, then closed her eyes briefly, exhausted. Funny how things circle back. Elijah sat in the chair beside her bed, suddenly feeling like the one being observed. "Why didn't you ask for help sooner?" Rachel gave a tired laugh. "Pride, shame, a bit of both. I kept thinking I could fix it on my own. Then one day, I couldn't." Lila climbed onto the edge of the bed. laying her head gently against her mother's shoulder. "You raised her well," Elijah said. Rachel looked at her daughter, then at him. "I raised her to be strong. She raised me to stay alive." They fell into a quiet stillness then, the kind that only comes after long struggle and unexpected tenderness. Elijah hadn't planned on being part of anyone's healing. He had built a life to avoid this kind of entanglement. But now, looking at the two of them, something inside him softened further, an edge dulled by connection. He stood to leave. "I'll let you rest. You're safe now. Both of you." Rachel nodded, eyes already fluttering shut. As Elijah walked out, Lila followed him to the door. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. He looked down at her, at the hope quietly tucked in her voice. "Yes," he said. "I'll be here." And this time, he meant it. The following morning, Elijah returned to the hospital with a paper bag in hand. Fresh clothes for Lila, a few children's books, and a small plush fox he had no idea how to choose, but had somehow bought anyway. He wasn't sure what it meant, this sudden instinct to care for someone, but it no longer felt foreign, just unfamiliar, like learning a forgotten language. Rachel was sitting up when he arrived, color returning slowly to her face. She looked tired but alert, her posture upright, her hands folded in her lap. Lila sat beside her, reading aloud in a careful whisper, sounding out long words with soft determination. When she saw Elijah, she lit up. "You came?" "I said I would," he replied, offering the bag. Lila reached for it eagerly, pulling out the fox and holding it like a treasure. "I'm naming her Button." Rachel gave him a skeptical glance. "You don't strike me as someone who shops for stuffed animals." "I don't," he admitted. "I stood in the aisle for 20 minutes. Her lips tugged into the smallest of smiles. "Well, thank you. For everything." "It's nothing," he replied automatically. Rachel shook her head. "No, it's something, and I need to say that out loud." Elijah sat beside her, unsure how to respond. He wasn't good with emotions when they weren't hidden behind contracts or layered in polite detachment. But Rachel didn't press him. She just let the silence stretch in the gentle way people who've known hard times learn to do. After the nurse came in to check Rachel's vitals, Elijah offered to take Lila with him for a few hours so Rachel could rest. She hesitated at first but relented when Lila insisted, tugging gently on her sleeve. "We'll be okay, Mommy," Lila said. "Elijah knows where the juice is." Back at the penthouse, Lila walked through the space like she'd never been there before, even though she had. This time she wasn't cautious. She wandered from room to room, trailing her fingers along the edge of tables, peeking into closets, marveling at the sheer size of the place. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes." "Don't you get scared?" He paused. "No. Not even at night?" He looked at her then. "Sometimes." She seemed satisfied with his honesty and plopped down on the couch, hugging Button tightly. "Can I color?" He handed her a box of art supplies he'd asked his assistant to order. They were untouched, still wrapped in plastic. She opened them like they were gold, carefully lifting out each marker and crayon as if they were fragile. He watched her draw, her small body hunched over the coffee table, completely absorbed in her own little world. She drew a fox, a house, a stick figure with tall hair labeled Elijah. Then, for the first time since she had entered his life, she laughed. A real laugh. Not a polite chuckle or nervous giggle, but a full-bodied, high-pitched sound that filled the quiet walls like sunlight. He turned away quickly, startled by the warmth that stirred in him. "Why are you laughing?" he asked. She pointed to the drawing. "Your head is bigger than Button's body." Elijah looked. It was, by a lot. He chuckled, quietly at first, then louder. The sound felt rusty, like a door creaking open after years of disuse. But it was real. Lila grinned. "See? You can laugh." He looked at her, truly looked, and something in him shifted again. Not as a CEO, not as a man trying to right a wrong, but as someone learning how to simply be with another human. That afternoon, they baked cookies, or rather, Elijah followed Lila's instructions from the back of a cereal box, and she made most of the decisions. The kitchen was a mess, flour on the counters, sugar on the floor, a single egg cracked too hard and sliding off the edge of the marble. And he didn't care. He hadn't felt that in a long time. Joy without condition. Later, as she drifted off on the couch, curled beneath a soft blanket with button tucked under her chin, Elijah sat beside her, watching the city lights blink on in the distance. The skyline hadn't changed, but somehow the world looked different now. And for the first time in years, Elijah didn't feel like he was waiting for something to begin. He felt like it already had. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Elijah hadn't expected. Gentle, chaotic, and strangely grounding. Mornings began with Lila sleepily wandering into the kitchen wrapped in a blanket, still clutching button. Afternoons were spent between visits to the hospital and quiet games in his living room. Evenings were softer now, less about silence and spreadsheets, and more about listening to Lila read aloud, or watching her fall asleep mid-sentence. Rachel's condition improved steadily. She was still weak, but her voice grew stronger, and her eyes regained the sharpness of someone used to surviving. Yet Elijah noticed a subtle shift. She was watching him more closely now. Not with distrust, but with quiet questions behind her gaze. One evening, as the three of them sat together at the hospital, Lila coloring while Rachel rested, Rachel said softly, "She's happier than I've seen her in years." Elijah nodded. "She's, good company." Rachel looked at him. "So are you." He wasn't sure how to respond, so he didn't. Instead, he shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with how much her words made something inside him flutter. But life, as it often does, refused to let him stay in that warm pocket for long. The call came late, just after midnight. It was a social worker. A report had been filed. A child was living under the care of someone with no legal guardianship, no family connection, no training, no permission. "We'll need to conduct an immediate welfare check," the voice on the phone said firmly, "and possibly remove the child into protective custody until the mother is discharged." Elijah's chest tightened. "She's not a case. She's a little girl, and she's safe." "I'm sure you believe that, sir, but we have protocol." He hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning they came. Two caseworkers, polite but unyielding, arrived at his penthouse with calm voices and clipboards. Lila watched from behind the kitchen counter, holding button tightly to her chest. Rachel had signed temporary power of attorney to Elijah, just a scribbled form given to the nurse. But it wasn't enough. "She's not in danger," Elijah argued. "Look at her. She's healthy. She's stable. She's laughing." "We don't doubt that, Mr. Monroe," the older woman said gently. "But until her mother is cleared and a formal arrangement is in place, she cannot remain in your custody." Lila stood frozen as the woman knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, we're going to take you to a nice place. Just for a few days, okay?" Elijah stepped forward. "She doesn't need a place. She has one." The younger caseworker shook his head. "That's not up to you." Lila's eyes filled, wide and searching. "Elijah." He crouched beside her. "I'm still here. You hear me? I'm not going anywhere." She nodded, trembling. Then they led her away. She didn't cry until the elevator doors closed. And Elijah stood there staring at the closed doors, unable to move. The penthouse behind him felt cavernous again. Still, cold. Like it had never been lived in at all. He didn't speak the rest of the day. He canceled meetings, turned off his phone, and sat in silence. Because in that moment, Elijah Monroe, who once prided himself on needing no one, realized he had lost something irreplaceable. He had lost a little girl he wasn't even sure he had the right to love. and that loss hurt more than anything success had ever soothed. The hours after Lila was taken blurred into a haze of silence and stillness. Elijah sat at the edge of his couch, hands clasped tightly, eyes locked on the spot where she had stood last. The penthouse, once just an elegant box of stone and steel, now echoed with her absence. The crayons were still scattered on the coffee table. Button, the little fox, had been left behind on the rug, forgotten in the rush, or maybe left there on purpose. He picked it up, holding it carefully, like something fragile. His throat ached. She had trusted him. She had laughed in his kitchen, drawn pictures of him with enormous hair, fallen asleep to the sound of his voice reading fairy tales, and he had let her be taken. For the first time in his adult life, Elijah Monroe didn't feel powerful. He felt helpless. That night he drove through the city aimlessly, past the glass towers and hidden alleys. His hands trembled on the wheel. His mind kept returning to her voice, to the weight of her small hand in his. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. By morning, he was in a lawyer's office, the best in the city. Paperwork sprawled across the desk. Guardianship, emergency custody, background checks, psychological evaluations. He said yes to everything, paid in advance, didn't care about the cost. "I need her back," he said, his voice low but firm. "Whatever it takes." It took 2 days, 2 long, relentless days. Rachel was still recovering, but once she was informed, she didn't hesitate. "I want you to have legal custody," she told him, her voice hoarse through the hospital phone. "Just until I can stand on my own again. Lila trusts you, and so do I." Elijah didn't speak for a moment. Then he whispered, "Thank you." The paperwork cleared faster than expected. On the 3rd day, Elijah stood outside the small group home where Layla had been taken. It was clean and orderly, the staff polite, but everything about it felt wrong. Too sterile, too temporary. A place meant to house children, not hold them. Inside, Lila sat on a faded blue couch, Button clutched to her chest again. Her eyes lit up the second she saw him. "Elijah!" She launched herself into his arms. No hesitation, no anger, just relief. "You came," she whispered. "I told you I would," he said, burying his face in her hair. She pulled back to look at him. "Are we going home now?" "Yes," he said. "We're going home." That night, back in the penthouse, everything felt different. Not like a guest had returned, but like a family had begun. Rachel was scheduled for discharge the following week. A care plan was in place. The legal documents were signed. Still, none of that mattered as much as the way Lila skipped barefoot through the halls, humming a tune she made up herself, or how she dragged her blanket to the couch just to fall asleep near him, or how she now drew pictures of 3 people instead of 2. She was still a child who had seen too much of the world too early. But Elijah, he was becoming a man who had waited too long to let the world in. And together they were building something. Not perfect, not polished, but real. A home built not from wealth or power, but from broken pieces choosing to stay together. That night after she fell asleep, Elijah looked down at the drawings she had made. 3 figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. A girl, a woman, and a man with spiky hair and a crooked smile. Above them, in shaky block letters, it read, "Us." Summer faded into fall, and with it came subtle changes, ones not marked by contracts or headlines, but by moments too quiet to capture on paper. Elijah found himself waking earlier, listening for the soft sounds of feet padding down the hall. He started keeping snacks in the lower kitchen drawers. His wardrobe slowly made room for art projects taped to closet doors. And on some nights, he caught himself smiling at nothing, just remembering the way Lila had hugged Rachel that morning, or how she corrected his spaghetti technique with the authority of a 5-star chef. Rachel, now recovering steadily, had moved into the guest room. She insisted it was temporary, But the laughter in the mornings and the way she left her coffee mug next to his said otherwise. She had a job now, modest, flexible, but hers. She walked taller, spoke with clarity. There was something about being believed in that reshaped her, and Elijah saw it day by day. But it wasn't until the night of the school presentation that everything changed. Lila's class had prepared a small assembly. Nothing grand, just a group of children on a modest stage, performing skits about kindness, community, and bravery. Elijah had almost skipped it, drowned in meetings and deadlines. But something pulled him there, something he couldn't name. He arrived just in time, slipping into the back of the small auditorium, dressed in a suit far too formal for the occasion. Lila was center stage. She wore a paper crown and held a drawing of a house in one hand and a small, stuffed fox in the other. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped forward, scanning the crowd. Then her eyes landed on him, and she smiled. "My name is Lila," she said, voice strong and clear. "This is Button, and this," she held up the drawing, "is our home." There was a soft chuckle from the parents around him. "I didn't always have one," Lila continued, "but now I do. Because sometimes family finds you when you're not even looking, and it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to love you back." Elijah couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She ended her piece with a simple line, "This is the story of how I found my family and how they found me." Applause followed. Rachel wiped away quiet tears, and Elijah stood frozen as the truth settled gently inside him. He never wanted kids. He never wanted the noise or the mess or the risk. But he had never known what it meant to be seen like this, to have a small child speak of him not as a benefactor or a businessman, but as family. On the drive home, Lila fell asleep in the back seat, her paper crown askew. Rachel rode beside him, quiet, thoughtful. At a red light, Elijah turned to her. "I never wanted any of this," he said. She looked at him puzzled. "But now," he added softly, "I can't imagine my life without it." Rachel reached over and took his hand. Neither of them spoke again for the rest of the ride. But everything had already been said. And in the stillness of that moment, with a child sleeping peacefully behind them and the city lights blinking softly ahead, Elijah finally understood. Redemption doesn't come with noise or grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in the form of a little girl who teaches you how to feel again, and a woman who believed in you before you ever did.